Frontline NHS England staff will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID by next spring, according to reports this morning.
But with around 110,000 yet to even have their first jab, could this put our health service on the brink? Joining us now, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. I'm not sure, are you even able to confirm, Mr Raab, welcome to the programme, by the way, that this policy is going to be put into place?
Well, I think you're referring, Susanna, to a tweet from the BBC, which was a sort of leaked report. We don't confirm or discuss or comment on leaks, and the government will set out their proposals in the normal way. What I would say is, with 10 million people having now had the booster vaccines, with the level of vaccination across the country, I think we're in a much better place to endure the colder months this autumn and this winter. But we know that there's a particular vulnerability around those in care home and the NHS settings, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that they're protected because of the vulnerability of the people in those settings. And I think that's right.
Yeah, there is a devastating consequence to this, that while we all want our most vulnerable to be looked after and protected, the care sector faces losing 60,000 workers when that deadline comes in on Thursday. We can't afford to lose that many workers from the care sector or the equivalent or more from the NHS if you're going to introduce this policy. How are we going to fill that gap?
Well, we've got the contingency plans in place to do that, but you're right to say it's a difficult decision. All I would say is, if the consequence of not taking difficult decisions is that more people, particularly more people who are vulnerable, either because they're in hospital or because they're in a care home and elderly or with multiple conditions, I think that's got to be the countervailing and overriding factor. We've got to do everything we can to protect those vulnerable, particularly elderly people or those with multiple conditions. And that means protecting.
Yeah, is there not an alternative though? Because, if I've got an elderly resident, an elderly relative who's a resident in a care home, and they face losing their carer, that obviously also puts them at risk. Is there not an alternative where we ramp up the testing system, for instance, for these workers and protect our most vulnerable that way?
So you're right to say we need to look at every alternative before taking a mandatory one. That's the approach that the government has taken. And I should say that both in the NHS and in the care home settings, the level of vaccination is now much, much higher than ever before. But I think ultimately that we've got to make sure that the lives of those people in those vulnerable settings are safeguarded. And that's a difficult choice. That's one of the many difficult choices that we've got in government. But I think we'd be getting a lot of criticism if we weren't taking those difficult decisions and we were leaving people more and unnecessarily exposed than before.
Now, can I also ask then, talking about leaving people unnecessarily exposed, yesterday you had an issue where the Prime Minister was not in the House of Commons to address these sleaze allegations. Instead, he was on a visit to a hospital in Northumberland. Why was he not wearing a mask?
Well, he followed the guidance that he got for the particular clinical settings as he went through the hospital, and I'm told and I understand that he followed all the guidance that he had for that, and he was wearing a mask in the areas where it was required.
I went to a hospital last week for an appointment. As soon as you walk in the door, you're requested to wear a mask. I mean, out of just general optics, wouldn't it be better for the Prime Minister to be wearing a mask? Are you saying that the hospital told him he didn't need to wear a mask?
No, all I'm saying is that as I understand it, that he followed all the guidance in relation to any clinical setting that he found himself in, and I think that's the right thing to do.
So the guidance was that he didn't need to wear a mask in that when he was meeting health workers?
Look, my understanding is that he followed all the guidance. He did wear a mask when he was required to, and I think that's the right thing to do when you go into any clinical, medical, NHS setting.
To be fair to you, Deputy Prime Minister, I should just tell you that on the screen now we're playing an image of the Prime Minister walking along, elbow-bumping 3 nurses, I presume, all wearing masks, with 2 people in the background, both wearing masks. The only person in the shot who isn't wearing a mask is the Prime Minister. Do you have an idea what the clinical difference between the Prime Minister and everybody else in that setting is, so that the Prime Minister doesn't have to wear a mask when he's not talking and everybody else does?
Look, I'm Justice Secretary, not the Health Secretary, let alone a clinician, so I defer to others who make those rules. I'm just telling you that my understanding is that the PM followed all the guidance and advice he was given.
Well, let's move on to something else. I just want to play a clip of one of your colleagues in Parliament yesterday, Steve Barclay, making an apology after the debacle over Owen Paterson. Let's just have a listen to that. Oh, we haven't got it for the moment, but I'm sure that you're aware of what was said. He said, oh, let's play it.
I would like first and foremost to express my regret, and that of my ministerial colleagues, over the mistake made last week.
Now, the Prime Minister yesterday, when asked about this 3 times, refused to say the word apology, mistake, error or sorry. You are the Deputy Prime Minister. Are you going to say sorry for what happened?
I'd say exactly what Steve Baker said yesterday, which it was clearly, in retrospect, a mistake to conflate 2 things. One, the individual case of an MP, and the other is the wider system, the due process, the fairness, the right of appeal in relation to the system. I'm very happy to say and comfortable saying that that's something that we regret, and we can't and shouldn't conflate the 2 issues, and that's why we've changed course in relation to the way we approach things. I do also think I should say it's right to look at make sure the rules are as robust as possible, but also to make sure that there is due process, a right of appeal, so that they're sustainable, and that's what anyone in any other professional walk of life would expect.
I think we thank you for the apology, and it is appreciated to hear it coming from you. I'm not quite sure why the Prime Minister wouldn't be willing to say it. Do you think he's going to say it in the future, or is he trying to shut the door and leave the rest of you to have to be the ones to fess up?
No, not at all. Steve Barclay is a senior member of the government as Cabinet Office Minister. I'm Justice Secretary, and we've got collective responsibility. So we're speaking for the whole government and across the board.
I just wonder, when I listen to the language used, which is about error, mistake and conflating 2 issues, there's no mention of ethics or morality. And one of the criticisms that's being levied at the government of this was a question of moral judgment. The moral compass wasn't pointing in the right direction. Do you see this as just a technical error, or do you believe actually there was a failing of ethics in what you were trying to do?
Well, I think both in relation to the individual case, but also the system that we have for dealing with issues like this and making sure that it is robust so that anyone engaged in paid advocacy, that's prohibited. There are clear rules on that, making sure that's enforced. That goes to the heart of ethics. I also think that making sure that the system is sustainable with due process, with a right of appeal, the thing that anyone, whether a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, a journalist, would expect, I think that also goes to ethics as well. I think at the heart of this is values, and I would be the first to say that I think whether you're an MP, in public office as a minister, we need to have the very highest standards of ethics. And I do think that is a moral issue, not just some sort of technical issue.
2 quickies for you. The Prime Minister wasn't in the Commons for the apology yesterday, nor were you. May I ask what you were doing yesterday?
So I was preparing for an emergency debate on the court's backlog, and we're a team. And so it's right that the PM is dealing with or visiting a hospital, given all the COVID challenges. It's right that Steve Barclay, the Cabinet Office Minister, is dealing with this issue. And of course, we've got a big challenge with the courts. That debate was subsequently pulled, but I was preparing, and I think it would have been very difficult to take 2 debates in one day.
And my final question. Look, the line is drawn that you're not allowed to lobby as an MP, but you are allowed to use your knowledge, skills and reputation as an MP to go and advise a company on how to work the political system and do political consultancy and advocacy. It's done by Conservative members. It's done by members of other parties as well, I should state. Do you not see that as a conflict of interest? Is it time that we ended the consultancy gravy train, if you like? Not second jobs. We understand doctors and lawyers, but stop giving MP political consultancy. Is it time to stop that?
Well, I certainly think that what people don't want is political undue influence over the business of government. And that's why paid advocacy or paid lobbying there are very clear and strict rules, and they ought to be enforced. And anyone that breaches those rules,
this is about giving consultancy and advice to companies. This is about giving consultancy and advice to companies, not lobbying, not trying to change the politics, but using your work as an MP to go and give a company an advantage by your knowledge base that you've gained as your work as an MP, as a sitting MP. Is that not a conflict of interest? Is it not time that we stopped it?
Well, look, the challenge you've got is I do think it's important in the House of Commons that we don't become so closeted, so secluded, that everyone says that we live in a bubble, which is one of the big charges. And I think that there's quite a lot of truth to it. So we do need very strict rules. I'm always happy to consider whether they're robust enough. That's why we've got the Committee on Ethics. It's got already a review underway in relation to the system. But I just think you need to be a bit careful, if I may say it, about Parliament becoming so secluded from the outside world. We've got.
Is it okay, Dominic? Raab,
Sorry,
is it okay? Well, no, because we've heard you make that point about the bubble, and of course we want our MPs to have experience. Is it okay that a Tory MP, Geoffrey Cox, former Attorney General, is advising the government of the British Virgin Islands and earning thousands doing it? Is that okay?
So just to finish the first point I was seeking to make, I do think it's good that we've got people who have worked as teachers, doctors, members of the armed forces, who's worked in business in the House of Commons. In relation to the specific question that you've asked about Geoffrey Cox, look, the rules and transparency are very clear. That's why you know and are able to ask that question. I think it's critically important. Ultimately, it's for the voters of any MP to decide whether they think that the people that represent them have got the right priorities. And that's the ultimate accountability we have in our democracy. And I think that's right.
Do his constituents have the right to think he has the right priorities if he's voting remotely from the Caribbean?
Well, at every election, they get the chance to scrutinise their MP, just as all voters do. And that's absolutely right.
So as long as he hasn't broken the rules and he's representing his constituents, you think everything that he's doing is okay?
No, it's not what I said, Susanna. What I said was it is up to his voters to decide whether he's got the right priorities, well beyond the question of whether he's broken the rules. And that basic compact is the same for every constituency MP. It's the same for me. Our voters will hold us to account during the election and decide whether they think that we're adequately representing them.
But as Deputy Prime Minister and a senior person in the party, you're happy for him to call himself a Tory, have a Tory whip, be a member of the Tory party. So you're saying, I mean, regardless of the issue itself, you're trying to say it's the voters' job. Isn't it your job to who represents your party as well?
Well, look, you're putting words into my mouth. What I'm saying is there are very clear rules on transparency, and the accountability comes at the ballot box, and that's absolutely right.
Thank you very much for joining us, Deputy Prime Minister. We appreciate your time.